And welcome this evening, everyone, to Spirit Talk Australia. And your hosts tonight are Anne Regovich and moi, Renata Daniel. And we are here again with a wonderful Australian special guest speaker tonight. And we'd love to introduce her. Her name is Karina Machado. And I've known of Karina for about 10 years or so, and I'll talk about that in a minute, but just a small introduction. Karina is a journalist with 25 years experience and the author of the non-fiction series Spirit Sisters, Where Spirits Dwell and Love Never Dies. Karina was born in Uruguay and was 2 when her family moved to Australia, where she grew up hearing stories of her mum's psychic gift, igniting a lifelong curiosity about Marvel mysteries and the unseen world. Always passionate about books and writing, Karina began her career in journalism as editorial assistant at Time magazine in 1994 and is a former senior editor at Who magazine. Now, her books are available in print and also audio, and they are narrated by Karina if you get them in audio. And she has launched 2 podcasts. My goodness, this girl is busy. One is called Spirit Sisters and the other is The Ghost Files. And we welcome Karina to the show. Hello, my darling.
I got the timing right.
Hi, ladies. It's lovely to be here. Thank you.
Wow. Well, haven't you been a busy chookie over the last couple of years?
Yes.
Wow. What started all of this off for you?
So from the get-go or the podcast?
From the get-go.
From the get-go. Well, for me, as you mentioned in the introduction, a lot of it came from the stories that Mum shared of her childhood in Uruguay. So my family came to Australia when I was 2 years old, but obviously my parents grew up there. And there were just some key stories that she told that just sort of lodged in my heart and ignited this fascination. And I think the stories, what they were about premonitions. So she had sensed the imminent deaths of some family members. And she told how, for instance, in one of them, she was just in the kitchen as a young woman, probably still in her teens or just around 20. And she suddenly, and the radio was on and she was cooking and she just reached out, put the volume down on the radio and said, "Uncle is dead, turn the music off." And that's when my grandfather, so her dad, came running in saying that his brother had collapsed. And so they went and they did, CPR and all of that, but he had indeed died and he was only in his early 40s. And my mum had sensed that. So that was one of the stories. And I just always thought, what's behind an experience like that? So that was kind of the first thing. And I loved reading, as you said. So I used to read all the time, and Woolies would sell these really cheap paperbacks they had a book aisle. That's, I'm probably aging myself here, but yeah, they had a book aisle and I would just grab them and they had names like World's Most Shocking True Ghost Stories. And they were these little cheap paperbacks. Yeah. And I'd just pop them in the trolley, and my parents were good because they supported that. And they were, true stories, which I loved. And I'd do that. And then, it was just this, I guess that what I loved about the stories, I was always really drawn to the hope that was in them. To me, they signified hope and something kind of exciting and thrilling. I wasn't really ever drawn to a dark sort of spooky side, although there was a thrill with the spookiness, but it was more this idea of hope, and it was a kind of empowering idea, actually. Yeah.
So how did Spirit Sisters come about? Because that was your first one.
Yes.
What was it, a particular story that you heard or someone that you met or something that sparked it off for you?
There was definitely something that sparked it. I always like to say that there were many paths that converged and led to the creation of Spirit Sisters, but there were a few things that stood out. One was this idea of kind of what we're doing now today. We're 3 women and obviously all of our audience sharing stories. And I loved that. I would do that with my sister, with my mum. We'd share stories, we'd watch movies, talk about them, that kind of thing. And I loved that idea of women sharing stories. So that was one. I wanted a book that would gather in one place all the stories, women's stories that I loved, that I'd heard, or at least be something like that to sort of recreate that experience of us talking and sharing. And so there was that. And then, there was this thing that happened where my husband started to see ghosts in our house. And yes, like full apparitions. And that was very strange because, well, obviously, but one of the very strange things was that we'd been living in that little house for quite a long time. And, there had been nothing amiss or, no paranormal activity. And it was an old house. It was a 1920s Californian bungalow. So he started to see them. He saw a woman, a little girl. The first one he saw was a little boy. Then came the woman, and then lastly the little girl. And I didn't see them, but I certainly picked up on the difference in the energy in the home at that time. And I was hearing things, and there was some movement of objects and, slight poltergeistal stuff. So I thought, what is it that can lead someone that has not had these experiences to suddenly begin to have them? So I wanted to kind of investigate that. And in Spirit Sisters, there is a chapter called Awakenings, and it's about the various ways that the psychic gift might come to the fore. And in his case, it turned out to be meditation unlocked some sort of dormant gift in him.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. But in other people, it's different things. Like it can be grief. It can be, because I was looking at women, I was looking at these certain stages as well in their lives. And sometimes that is puberty. At other times it's motherhood, those kinds of things as well. So those two things kind of collided, and always the idea of wanting to celebrate the idea of sharing our stories. That was really key as a story lover from way back.
Another question?
Oh, me?
Yeah.
What was your favourite ghost stories?
From the books?
Yes. No.
Oh.
I should have asked this back when you were popping those books back into your mother's trolley when you're shopping. What was your favourite ones?
Oh, you're right. There were key ones. And the other thing I should have mentioned at around that time, I was watching these great shows from the 80s, Great Mysteries of the World, and That's Incredible. So people who grew up in the 80s, you might remember that. And they were so good. But I loved the stories from England. I loved their haunted houses. And, because it's such a different environment to ours, it's so far removed and mystical, this mystical quality. I really loved that. I loved, any kind of monk appearing in an ancient abbey. I loved that. Later on, I can't remember at what point I first read about, the Enfield poltergeist, but I found that very fascinating when I first learnt about that as well.
Did you get to go to England and maybe try some of those old houses?
I did go to England. I did. I went with my sister, and I've been a few times. Luckily, I do love it. A bit of an Anglophile, but my sister tells a funny story because we were staying at a beautiful place that's associated with Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn, and we were staying in a room where they had supposedly stayed, and my sister is a writer as well, and she writes about Anne Boleyn. So I was there with her. She was researching a book, and so we stayed in this room, and my sister said, okay, well, we should try to sort of see what we can sense or summon Anne as a spirit. And I just got so scared. I blocked everything. And she's been teasing me mercilessly ever since about being the not so intrepid investigator. Yeah, but I do love England. It's so atmospheric.
Yeah, so do we. How many times have I been now? 3 times? 3 times? I could go every year and I still wouldn't find enough. Enough time to see everything. You could just keep going back and going back.
You would have loved, we went to the Blackfriar Pontefract house where the poltergeist is supposed to be still active and the Blackfriar is supposed to appear. I sat on those stairs where people have been pushed down and things thrown down, begging for something to happen, and nothing happened.
That's the way, isn't it? Yeah. And we went to Hampton Court Palace as well, where I don't know if you went there, but there's an amazing... No. There was an apparition of Henry that apparently appeared quite famously about 12 or 15 years ago now, but some people believe that's been debunked. I don't know. I'm not so sure.
Yeah, it gets difficult because we're so keen to find an answer for everything that sometimes I think we over debunk, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, yeah. That's why I like to say that, I love mysteries and marvel, because the great mystery is just, there's something just kind of delightful about it.
Yeah. It gives us all hope that we're more than just this flesh and bone mass that is
That's
walking
right.
around with a very small brain in it.
So you worked at a couple of papers, or not papers, but magazines. So there was the Who magazine, Times, was it? I hear you say. What else was there?
Yeah, Time was where I started my career. I was editorial assistant. So I was very, very junior, obviously, but I feel so privileged to have been able to work at a magazine like that, with such an amazing heritage behind it. It came from the stable of Time Inc. magazines in the US, and because I started through that channel right at the bottom, I was able to learn just the most amazing, methods and just integrity, and it was so valuable. Yeah, so after Time, which I was only there for, I think, about 18 months, I heard of an opening upstairs at a relatively new magazine called Who that had opened as the Australian little sister of People magazine. That was a pop culture, still around, pop culture magazine weekly in the US. And Who had opened, and it was doing very well, and it had a very good reputation. And so I was really lucky to get a job there, again, on the bottom rung of the ladder, a job known as fact checker. So my job was basically, in the pre-internet days, or just burgeoning internet, me and a team of other fact checkers would get a big file like that fat when a journalist had finished writing a story, and it was our job to go through it and confirm every single fact. And we would use encyclopedias and atlases and wherever
to make
possible.
sure they didn't get sued.
That's right. We'd ring back talent wherever possible and just go over it with them. So this is how you spell your name, and you're this age, and check facts within quotes and all of that. It was really, really good training, and it taught us to be so meticulous and careful. Yeah.
And did any paranormal stories come across your desk during your time?
Do you know, we did, I think it might have been just before my time, but Who actually did a cover story on ghosts, which is something that, you just would not see that in a mainstream women's magazine these days, but Who did it? And they talked to a range of people, and they had a story of a haunting in the Mornington Peninsula and various other things. Yeah, so that was an amazing cover story that they did, and it was a very well reported investigation. Quite serious.
And did that kind of spur you on to write your own series of books and start with Spirit Sisters? I'm wondering whether there was a particular person that really affected you with their story with regard to that.
There was. Actually, you reminded me, Renata, and it does have a link to Who. So as I sort of stayed at Who and the years went on, I went on to become the books editor. So my job was to look after the books pages and any interviews that had to do with authors or books or book reviews. I looked after all of that. It was really great. And there was a publicist who took me out. Well, publicists used to take me out to lunch and coffee so that they could pitch books to me to cover in the magazine. And there was one in particular who was an amazing psychic and medium. And she, as well as being a wonderful person and book publicist, and she told me some great stories. And there was one about a Scottish castle and some, she'd sensed the spirit of a child there. And it was just, she was a great storyteller too. And so I said to her, I'd love to gather these stories in a book. I'd really love to do that and call it Spirit Sisters. And she said, why don't you do that? That sounds really good. Why don't you write me a proposal and I'll stick it under the publisher's nose? And I said, would you really do that? And she said, of course, And I procrastinate so much. It's just one of these problems that I have, that it took me a whole year almost to get onto that one-page book proposal. And anybody who wants to get a book out is listening and might be listening just thinking, what was wrong with me? Well, good question. I don't know. Except that I just, chronic procrastinator. But what got me to finally write that proposal was a story that was in the Sunday Telegraph that said that there was a boom in the supernatural, and it was women driving this boom, and that they're all going to these ghost hunts and these places. And it was all about that. And I said, oh my God, that's the time. This is it. This is the time. So I did it. I did a little, very, very, I'm going to say it was like a skeleton of a book proposal. It wasn't very substantial, but it had the basics, what I wanted in the book. And true to her word, she put it under the publisher's nose. And within a couple of weeks of that, she had organised for me to have lunch with the publisher. And soon after, I had a book contract. So, yeah, thanks for reminding me. Yeah.
Wow.
And look, I had to, because you'd said that they'd put a paranormal story on the front page. I just have to show you. This is in the latest Woman's Day.
Yes.
Just want to say, Renata, double page spread. Hello. Look at that.
That is fantastic coverage.
I know.
Yeah, it must have been a slow news week. That's all I can say.
Well, it's an interesting thing that in the mainstream we might be coming back that way again, because this fascination, although it's never gone away, perhaps in these times, these very strange times that we're living in at the moment, people perhaps have more of an opportunity to tap into that side of themselves again and are wondering about these matters again and questioning, So I'm really pleased to see that in there, Renata. That's great.
Yeah, I've been listening to your podcast and you ask the most interesting and intriguing questions of people, Karina, which is very good. I really like it. The podcast, The Ghost Files and Spirit Sisters.
Are you listening to both of them? What are they about? Because there's two. So which one's which?
Yes. Okay. So Spirit Sisters is the one that came first. And what happened there was May last year, I wanted to find a way to celebrate, to honour the 10th anniversary of Spirit Sisters' release. So my book was released, my first book, in 2009. And it was such a beloved book to me and also to readers. Like, of all of my books, it's the one that's been the most popular and it's got a real special place in people's hearts. So I wanted to find a way to honour that. So I came up with the idea of doing a podcast, and my sister, who I mentioned before, she's got a fantastic podcast about the Tudors of England, and she set me up. She told me what to do and how to do it. So I gave it a go, and I started. In some of my early shows, the sound quality is not quite there and whatnot, but I've learnt as I've gone. But so I did Spirit Sisters with the idea of trying to track down some of my former interviewees from the book, which proved a little bit harder than I had hoped. But of course, 11 years had passed from the time that I'd initially interviewed them. But I did find a few. And then so I wanted to do that, and I also wanted to introduce new women's stories as well. So did that, and my editor at the time, because I had left Who, but I was still working casually for them, she liked it and wanted something similar to go into what was then called the Pacific Magazine's podcast network. And so I came up with the idea of the Ghost Files for them, which is a shorter so where Spirit Sisters is long conversations that encompasses the a person's lifetime of experiences generally, the Ghost Files is more one story, what happened this one time, and that the talent unfolds it over about half an hour usually, whereas Spirit Sisters is more these longer conversations, like more breadth to them. But yeah, so off the back of Spirit Sisters, I was commissioned to do the Ghost Files, and so that started last July. So it's been going about a year now. So this is kind of the first birthday of the Ghost Files right now.
Oh, well, happy birthday!
Yeah.
And has there been a favourite story in the Ghost Files?
Oh, there's so many good ones. Honestly, people have been wonderful in the way they've responded to the Ghost Files and the reviews that they leave. I'm really so delighted that they take the time. But trying to think, so there are some really scary ones on the Ghost Files. There was a woman, Bella, who sent me an email and said, I've got a really scary story to tell you. And that was basically all the email said. So I was like, my curiosity was piqued, obviously. So I responded and said, can I ring you now? And she said, because that was the evening. She goes, I can't talk about it at night. I went, so I was even more curious. Wow. So then eventually when I did speak to her, she told me that it was, she'd seen something, quite scary looking. I don't really like to use the term demonic but that's what she'd seen, something like that. And it all sprang from experiences, a kind of obsession that she'd developed with the Ouija board. So yeah, we can talk about that one for probably an entire episode. You might have done that already.
No, I collect them. It's okay. I don't mind Ouija boards.
Good. Yeah. And so so there's that one. Bella's story is fascinating because she ended up telling me, I ask a question of all of my guests at the end of the Ghost Files, and it's the same question. It says, what can an experience with the dead teach us about living? And it's always so fascinating, the answers that they come up with. And Bella's was really interesting because she said, you know, just don't be obsessed with anything negative. Don't be, and by that, I don't mean the Ouija board so much, but the sense of control that she had, an obsession, those things were dark because she was kind of an evangelist for seances, and she was going around trying to really turn people towards, you know, doing this, and she was quite obsessed. And those were the things that she was telling me were negative. That kind of wanting to control another's opinion and just the depth of her obsession. And she said, you know, don't concentrate on those kinds of things, like think about positive things. I mean, it sounds a little bit love and light-ish, Pollyanna-ish, but so many of my guests do tell me something along those lines at the end of the show, which I find fascinating. Another one that I love is, and this lady has become a dear friend, a correspondent, kind of like an old-fashioned pen pal. And she tells a beautiful story of a little girl spirit called Annabelle that she saw manifest in her home, a girl of about, I want to say about 5 or 6. And so she didn't know her name was Annabelle at the beginning, but they developed a kind of relationship where my guest, Danny, helped her, and she would appear to her just frequently, so more than once. And then a very strange thing was happening where she would appear to her and her husband in their dreams, and she would sort of continue to unravel her story and explain her story to the two of them in their dreams, separately, of course, and then they'd talk about it, and together they'd try to unpack her story. And in the end, Danny ended up finding out that something quite horrible had happened to her, like she'd been abused, and so she and the little girl was just lost between worlds, and Danny helped her find her way home. And so it's quite a lovely one. Yeah, there's just some beautiful stories.
In all the stories that you have heard, and this is, I guess, a deep question, in all the stories you have heard, have you yourself made your mind up about what all of this is? What is it, a projection?
What is the meaning of life?
Oh,
is it a projection? Is it something tangible that is out there? Is it a kind of a two-way street that it has to be us and them?
Are you referring to the other world or the other side or whatever? What is it?
Have you made up any idea about what people are tapping into?
Well, I think it comes back to this question of consciousness and what is consciousness, and, you know, is there a creator, or is there, if you don't like that term, like, is there a deeper, bigger intelligence that is behind all of this? I mean, certainly it's a good question, Renata, because I don't think you can, you know, delve into this inquiry of ghosts and spirits and whatnot without then going deeper into the spiritual questions, you know, that say, who am I? You know, why am I here? Like the classic philosophical, spiritual, you know, doozies.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I think that that's all one, like this idea. And if you do delve into spirituality and try and pursue that kind of inquiry, you do come to these ideas that various religions do speak of in different ways. And that's the idea of oneness, that on a level that we can't actually see or intuit, most of us can't anyway, we are all connected. And science, you know, has obviously proven this to some extent with quantum physics. And, you know, at the basic level, if you break down anything, you're going to get to the same thing. And it's continually breaking down, like to infinity. And I find that fascinating because if you study near-death experiences like I have been for the last few years, I just love them because I feel like they've got the best clues as to how to answer your question, I guess, Renata. They often talk about this this supreme presence that they meet, this loving presence, and it's infinite. They talk about this infinity as well. And so I do believe, and if you know a little bit about synchronicity, about these events, and in my book Love Never Dies, I've got a whole chapter about synchronicity because I'm fascinated with those stories too. And it does seem to be some sort of co-production. Like if a loved one makes themselves known as a butterfly or as I don't believe it's the butterfly that is suddenly the loved one, but what's happened is that the consciousness of the loved one and the consciousness of the person still on the earth and the consciousness of whoever is the dreamer of the dream or the creator has all combined to be able to make this beautiful event take place that provides some healing to the person. And I think it's the same thing with the spirit world, and if somebody you loved and lost appears to you at the end of your bed with a message, that's going to be healing. And that's helpful. And obviously, of course, the complicating factor is when frightening things happen. And I think, that too, it is that dance between the person having the experience and what's being experienced. It is an interplay, as you mentioned. Yeah.
They talk about the when we have old crone syndrome, when they have that
sleep paralysis.
Sleep paralysis, that's it. Thank you very much.
Old hag.
Yeah.
You're thinking of yourself, they're old crone.
Old hag syndrome, where a lot of people will come out of that feeling as though they have had something very, very dark and awful occurring. And it is something that is present in all of us. And it's interesting that for some people, the mind goes down that roadway instead of the other roadway, which is really interesting.
It is.
Considering that they may not show any or present anything like that in real life. You don't have to be an axe murderer to have a sleep paralysis episode and then have dark dreams or something dark come to you. It seems to not have a focus point to say, I'm going to pick this particular type of person. It just happens. So it's quite interesting what triggers that that perspective, as opposed to just the sweet, beautiful perspective of the healing process.
Well, I think a lot of that has to do with our, the human experience, the personal experience, the accumulated years of pain or suffering and the joys that people have had. And sleep paralysis often emerges in the teenage years. And I don't think that that's surprising with the angst that can be felt in the teenage years and, the mix of hormones. And another interesting thing is that, it's usually a teenager at the heart of a poltergeist haunting as well. And I don't think that's any coincidence too. So it does have to do. I mean, I've done so many interviews where I hear a scary story and then I'm told that, this person was young at the time, they were experiencing some sort of abuse or a dysfunctional home or, drugs, alcohol involved as well, that kind of thing. And there does seem to be a sort of a mirroring of experience as well. Yeah. And sometimes, like you mentioned, the sleep paralysis, it's, it can affect anybody. I haven't actually had it, touch wood, but my sister has had it and it's very common. And perhaps somebody doesn't have to have had those depths of deeply painful trauma, but, perhaps there's something in them that they haven't explored, some pain, some angst, and then our consciousness wants to show us things as well. And I think also we can't know about how many dimensions are out there or how many, what we're possibly living in at the moment. The mystery is so huge. Who's to say that somebody who's suffering sleep paralysis isn't actually dipping into momentarily into some other dimension where anything's possible?
Absolutely. With all the stories and thousands of stories every week of people having extraordinary things happen to them, it's a little bit, nonsensical for us to keep saying this is all a figment of our imaginations. Because
so true.
we must all have fantastic imaginations to think up all of these things. And some of these things, as you would probably know, as someone who collects these stories, people would say to you, I couldn't make this up in a million years. Yeah. I couldn't make this up, and yet this is what happened to me.
Oh, yes. I have heard that time and again.
Do you find, or your husband find, any of the spirits that you have to deal with when you are talking to these people come and visit you, bring a message to you personally?
Oh, to me? Oh,
yeah.
So I know what you're saying. So in the process of my interviewing, my podcasting, whether I then, well, what comes to mind when you ask that is when I was writing my second book, Where Spirits Dwell, I did an interview with an amazing lady called Christine Simpson, who had a very tragic thing happen to her. And that was the death of her little girl who was murdered. And the reason I went to visit Christine and get her story is because I had read in a newspaper article just a few quotes of hers where she said something along the lines of, I know Ebony is still with me. I know she's with me. I feel her. She's with me all the time. I see her. And I thought, oh. And so I reached out to Christine and she was happy to do the interview. And Where Spirits Dwell was a book about hauntings, but in this particular chapter, my angle was haunted by love, and this idea that we can be haunted by the ones that we've loved, but in a quite beautiful way. So it was turning that idea of the haunting on its head a little bit. And so that was a very difficult story for me to do the interview and to even then transcribe the interview and begin to write it. There were many, many months that transpired because I was putting it off because it was such a difficult interview. Not difficult with Christine, but just the content, you know. And I was, at the time, my children were very little. Now they're 18 and 20, but back then they were quite little. And it was very difficult. And so there was one night where I had managed to do the story, and I think the book was close to being complete. It was one of the last stories I wrote. And I had this sort of sense, I was asleep at night and I woke up to the idea of a beautiful purple swirl kind of dancing at my bedside. And I had a real sense that was Ebony and that she was happy with the story and that she was happy that I'd spoken to her mum. So that was one instance where I thought maybe and then another one that comes to mind is in my third book, Love Never Dies, I interviewed a wonderful man and his partner, Vicky. So do you know Marcus Lang? Marcus Hoodie Lang?
Yes.
Oh, Marcus Hoodie Lang, yeah.
Okay, well, yeah. So for anyone who doesn't know him, he's a wonderful medium and a beautiful bloke as well. And so I interviewed him for my book, Love Never Dies, because his story was all about a beloved person in his life who'd passed and then became a spirit guide and was delivering the most wonderful apports to him from the spirit world. Like just anything you can imagine would turn up, and he was communicating through Scrabble tiles. And when I went to interview Marcus, I did it in person and Vicky was there as well. He was telling me about how coins, manifest everywhere for him, and that's just one of the little signs. And as he was saying that, a coin bounced. Like we're all there at a cafe and all of our hands are on top of the table. And he's telling me this. And then I heard a ding by my foot. And I looked and there was this very sparkling, it looked like a newly minted coin, which it was bouncing on its side, like just quite precariously near my foot. And I picked it up and I said, a coin like this one. It was quite weird. And another time...
I had an experience with Marcus as well.
Did you?
Yes, we were at the expo that Appy did when it was at the Parramatta Town Hall.
Yeah, that's where we met.
Yeah, that's when I met Marcus for the first time. Yeah. And he came over and he talked to us for a little bit and then wandered off, and then came back and said, they told me that they've left something there for you. And there was this cigarette lying there with a brand on it that nobody had ever heard of. And the guy that was working with me had just run out of all these cigarettes and was dying for one. Oh. And this cigarette just happened to apport.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's fantastic. It's
Sorry, I
truly
didn't mean to interrupt
wonderful.
you, but it was
No,
so
no,
cool.
no, no.
And there was
It's
coins
really
that were
cool.
dropping down and rolling down the
Yes.
steps and things like that. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, so there you go. So that was another way that the stories kind of impacted me personally, and also just on Marcus. Like around the time that I was writing his story for Love Never Dies, I was again woken up in the middle of the night by the sound of a coin falling, and under my bed there was a coin as well. So it manifested there too. Yeah, when he was nowhere in sight. And I actually had another really fascinating experience, if you want me to tell you, to do with an Apport and Marcus again.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes, please.
I've actually got it here. I can show it to you. This is, well, I'll tell the story first. So this last year, the Sydney chapter of IANS, the International Association of Near-Death Studies, opened. And I started to go. I've not had a near-death experience, but as I said, I'm fascinated. And Marcus has had one. So he was there, one of the founding people. And I'd done a talk. I was invited to talk and share my story as an author and a journalist. I did that. And then at the end, I was leaving, and his partner, Vicky, said to me, and she's developing her gifts as well, and she said to me, she stopped me, she grabbed me and she said, I've just got to tell you, they're showing me something and I don't know what it is, and she drew in the air like that with her fingers, a heart shape. And she said, it looks like a heart shape, but it's actually two wings that are meeting, like angels' wings, but I just don't know why they're showing me this picture. And I said, oh, okay, well, that's interesting. And we were leaving and going to another function. I was there with my husband, and we left, went to the function, and then went home. And when I got home, it was quite late that night, there was something on my bed, and it was this little thing, if you can see it.
Oh, wow.
My gosh.
So that was on my bed. That was on my bed. So with no Marcus or Vicky around, I hadn't even, like, if anybody's thinking, oh, somebody slipped in your handbag. No, because I had just walked into my room and looked and saw this unfamiliar thing, which I'd never seen in my life, actually. I'd never, ever seen it. But it was exactly what Vicky had seen in her mind's eye and described. And this is I love this. I look at it every day, and it's a reminder of, marvels, mysteries and marvels.
That's incredible. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, we've got some people here asking, where can they buy your books?
Oh, okay. So my books are available online. Actually, Spirit Sisters was re-released in February as in its 10th anniversary edition. So that one's very easy to find in bookshops as a physical copy, and also online and Kindle and audiobook as well. The others are easier to find on as audiobooks or ebooks now. They're just a little bit trickier to find. Although if anybody wants Love Never Dies, which is the last one that came out 6 years ago, I have copies of it. How am I doing that?
Can they find that on your website?
That's it.
So they can, if people message me if they want a copy, I can organize that with them directly.
Yep. So
and I've also got
I've
got a few
your
copies
website
of
running across the screen there, so they can contact you through your website. Now I've got a question from Mel. I wonder what are all of your thoughts on the Church of Spiritualism?
Well, spiritualism is something that I'm very intrigued with, and it's fascinating because I'm starting to learn something of my family history. On my father's side, the Machados, there's some wonderful documentation that I'm only just learning about. And speaking of spiritualism, there's somebody in my ancestors, in my family, who has deep ties to the Spiritualist Church in Brazil. So I find that really interesting, given my fascination and what's happened. I didn't know that, until recently. So I'm intrigued. I mean, I've only ever once been to a service, and I found it quite beautiful. I enjoyed the singing, and there was a lovely kind of raised atmosphere, high frequency in the room, which I liked. But I haven't actually gone to more than one service. I haven't delved into it enough. But I know that it brings solace to many, many people to go there. And I would be willing to investigate. And attend more services in future.
I'm fascinated by the whole age of spiritualism as well.
Yes.
From the Fox sisters right through to the 1920s and 30s and everything that went on there, and the mediums, and it was actually Marcus who put me on the path of looking at physical mediums. and that's another whole topic.
I love physical mediums as well. Go on. It's so intriguing.
Some of the spiritualist churches that we've dealt with, it was interesting that they seem to have lost touch with their roots, many of them. And they've forgotten. Well, we were running a tour, and we had a group of spiritualists, a church of spiritualists, come along to the tour, and they never heard of table tipping. And I thought that was fascinating, or table rapping, or anything like that. I thought,
who were the Fox sisters?
Who were the Fox sisters? Guys, this is your history.
It's a fascinating time, isn't it? I'm really intrigued by that whole birth of spiritualism as well. And I feel like there could be, I don't know if it's a novel or if some sort of idea for a book, or I'd love to see a movie, a good movie about that time, because it's so full of stories and just this, it's almost like the birth of this amazing new era. It's intriguing.
There's a good one on the Spiritism, which is different to Spiritualism. Spiritism with Alan Kardec, and there's I think what's the movie called? Is it called Kardec?
It's called Kardec,
and that's an interesting look at that aspect.
On Netflix, I think. Is
Netflix
it?
or Prime?
I've seen it. Yes, it's very good. Yes, I enjoyed that.
And they've got people on your website right now. Here's a question from Kel. Have you dealt with anyone who's experienced a shared death experience?
I have, actually. And I was very, thanks for the question, Kel. I was really happy to speak to somebody because I'm intrigued by them too. And I've read, there's a wonderful book by, I believe, if I haven't got this wrong, it's by Raymond Moody, who wrote Life After Life, and it's called Glimpses of Eternity. And it's about the shared death experience. So there's a whole book written about it. And the story that I heard personally firsthand went on my Ghost Files podcast a few months ago, and my interviewee was called Celeste, and she told an absolutely beautiful, though tragic, story of her sister. So Celeste was 12 at the time and her sister was 13, and they were very, very close. And her sister went out on her push bike one day in the 1980s and was hit by a car and died. But she didn't die immediately, so she was in a coma for a couple of days. And the family was all, she had quite a few brothers and sisters, they were all called in to say goodbye. And so when Celeste said goodbye to her sister and left the hospital, all she knew was that she was still in the coma. And Celeste went and stayed at a family member's house that night and went to sleep. And she had what she at first thought was a dream. And in it, her sister was there, and she just was so beautiful, and they were holding hands. And she was taking her to this, she was in this amazing meadow, it was just like just what you read about in the NDEs, and she saw some deceased, she saw a school friend who had passed away from leukemia, and she was in a bathing suit, and she had a blow-up ring around her, and she looked so happy, just having so much fun, and then she saw another relative who'd passed away, and she had a real sense of God or love, this deep love. And then she woke up, and as she woke up, her siblings were there saying, they told her that there had just been a phone call from the hospital saying that her sister had passed. So that wasn't to Celeste, and I agree, that was much more than a dream. That was her sister showing her where she was going, and that she was going to a better place, a beautiful place, and that there were friends and loved ones there as well. So I was very glad to do that interview because it is a truly intriguing topic.
And it's not all dark and demons and sometimes people just misunderstood. So yes, this will be available to watch later on. So don't forget. Found Buckland's Solitary Seance was a great little book to read. Yes.
Oh, thank you.
Have you ever attended a seance?
Well, seances were another thing that led me. Remember I said about the various paths that led me to write Spirit Sisters? So being an immigrant, one of the interesting things that my parents and other immigrant families from Uruguay used to do back in those days when I was very small, 5, 6, 7, they would get together for seances. And it was a social thing. And I grew up sort of seeing that peeking out from behind the door because we kids weren't meant to do that. We would just play. but we were fascinated, you can imagine. So we'd do everything we could to try and see this wine glass, you know, traveling around the table, and everybody, sometimes there'd be tears and that people would be so moved. But for them, it was a true form of connection, and they were really, the intention was to connect with the loved ones left behind, just, you know, the ones that had passed in the old country. So it was a real sense of this connection and bonding. So I didn't, you know, have a sense of anything scary. Again, it was just that idea of hope, the hope they're trying to, it was like a language that they created to try and connect with the people that were in the old country and that they never had a chance to say goodbye to. So, and then, like, you know, most teenagers, we did the thing as well and tried to talk to the spirit world and got too scared and then threw everything away and ran away squealing, you know. But I haven't gone to like a formal seance, say, in the sense that Marcus might hold, you know, and physical mediumship might happen. I haven't actually done that, no.
Oh, well, we'll have to get together at some point in time soon once we're all allowed to.
Yeah, we're allowed in the small
That'd be
space.
great.
We've been, before
Give
all
me 2
of,
seconds, you keep going.
before COVID hit, we had actually been running seances here in Newcastle for well over a year, and doing 3 or 4 a month. And that's exactly the same thing we would find. We would find that it was all so loving and so much joy and healing.
So much healing.
And sometimes there were tears, and sometimes we'd have people who would be arguing, and I don't want to speak to this person. And we're saying, but this person wants to speak to you. They want to finally be able to say, I'm sorry, and can you forgive me? And can we move on, because I really want to be with you, but you're blocking because, you know, you're still holding on to stuff that happened while I was alive. And it would be at the end this emotional release that was just so beautiful. It so was. We would walk away sometimes, you know, leading people out the door, and the door would close, and we'd just turn around to each other and go, wow. What just happened?
And it's such an honour to sit and help people heal.
It is.
It's really an amazing experience. Yeah. That was the book that somebody had mentioned, the Solitary Seance.
Oh, fantastic. I'll make a note of that.
How You Can Talk with Spirits on Your Own by Raymond Buckland.
Wow. Solitary Seance. Okay, I'm going to look that up.
It's a nice little book, very easy to read, and it's got all different sorts. You've got the tarot, scrying, pendulum, all sorts of things in there.
Okay.
Well, one of the big questions we always get is how can I speak to my deceased relatives? How can I speak to them? And I guess I'm going to ask that question to you. What would you say to someone, after all the stories you've gathered, what would you say to someone who said, well, how can I make that connection to my deceased loved ones?
I would say that firstly, your intention has to be there. It has to be pure in the sense that, you know, like Anne mentioned before, if there's anger, if there's unforgiveness, if there's those kinds of emotions, I feel will potentially block a connection. So there just has to be a pure just love and a desire to connect. And so then you could do something as simple as, before you go to sleep at night, you could send like a loving prayer out to them and say, please come to me in my dreams with love and tell me how you are. And, you know, you could just do that, as simple as that. Another thing, you know, what else do people do? Gosh, there's that idea of remembering the ways that you did connect in the past. And if there was a particular song or a particular moment, pay attention to those moments in your life where, you know, a song might pop up. That's actually a communication in some instances. You know, not all, but in some, you know, I'm sure you've heard stories like that.
Yeah, well, Anne works with music in the seances, and she will channel songs from the spirit world, and we'll listen to those in the first half, and people will be able to say, yeah, that was played at our wedding, or this means this, or that was played at someone's funeral, or they're songs from somebody's youth, and they all seem to make sense.
The song title is actually the daughter's name that had passed. Was that one threw me for a loop?
Wow, that's
Yeah.
great, Anne. So when you say you channel them, do you sing the songs or do you play
Um,
them? Or
so I actually have a Bachelor of Music Education, so music is a big chunk of my life.
yeah,
So I always seem to have music going through my head. There's always songs going through my head, and I just happened to notice during one of the seances that this particular song was going through my head, and we were trying to raise the energy. So I started to like sing the song, and
yeah.
somebody went, "Oh my God, that's the song that was played at." No, it suddenly dawned on me that, oh, that's how I connect, because I thought I
Wow,
was as psychic as a brick.
there you
Um,
go.
and then we're starting to get all these songs and people are making all these connections, and I've gone, holy moly, I've got
That's
a bit of psychic
great.
ability.
That's your dog.
I think we all do, but it's like you say, Anne, it's how that manifests that, that connection. And it's not always going to be in the same ways. It's going to be different, and it is going to tune in to our gifts and our passions. And, it's that heart connection. That heart connection counts for so much.
And the song going through my head at the moment is The Rose. Some say
Mm,
love
I love that.
is not all. Yeah, so I don't know what that one's going through. Maybe someone can relate.
So, anyone have any final questions before we close off this podcast this evening? If you have a particular question for Karina, please let us
Alicia's
know
songs
now.
as well. Karina, I do exactly that. I talk to the spirits before I sleep, sometimes during meditation, especially if I needed guidance.
That's
A lot of
great,
people
Mel.
saying music is the thing. Yeah.
Yeah, music
It
is
so
intrinsic
is.
to life.
And in many of the near-death experiences, they talk about the music that they hear, and they'd say this wonderful thing about how the flowers are singing and every blade of grass is singing, and it's just so powerful and beautiful. Music is a big part of that other realm. The Rose is such a gorgeous song too. It's also, the first thing that struck me when you said that, Anne, is it's connected obviously with the Mother Mary figure. So,
Yes.
this
Yeah.
divine feminine idea, and we're talking about spirit
When
sisters.
you just said that, I've got goosebumps all over me. Oh.
Wow. Do you have a patron that you worked at, talking about that, do you have a patron or any spirit essence
Deity.
that you tap into when you do all of this work?
Well, as I said, I've been going on this path of spiritual inquiry and delving, and I'm somebody who grew up with absolutely no religious instruction. I went to a very humble little public school and then high school, and I did a little bit of, the scripture class that all the kids went to in primary school. But other than that, I had nothing. I was baptized Catholic, though, but didn't do any sacraments and whatnot. Interestingly, that's proven in my case to be a kind of thank you, Claudia. She listens to the podcast. Thank you. In my case, that's proven to be a blessing because it let me be free to find my own way. And because I'm a lover of reading and literature, I have found my way through various beautiful spiritual texts. And one of the things that I started reading a few years ago was A Course in Miracles. And I don't know if anybody is familiar with that or knows what it is. It's a channeled text that was channeled over a period of 6 years.
You just dropped out a little bit when you said miracles. What was the rest of the title?
A Course
A
in
Course in
Miracles.
Miracles, right.
A Course
Right.
in Miracles. Yeah. And so that was a channeled text over in the 60s and 70s, and the author of that text is supposedly Jesus. So he has become quite special to me, actually. So a real figure of comfort. Yeah.
Yeah, well, most of us are carrying Catholic guilt, which doesn't help anyone. It's like everything we do
That's
is
what
wrong.
I mean. I was so lucky to not.
Everything we do is wrong and demonic anyway, so...
We're going to hell. We're going to have a party down there. It's all right. Tamara can join us. Mama tea.
Oh, dear. Oh, look, it's been just absolutely fascinating speaking to you. And I know for those of you that don't know yet, we are having a huge paranormal conference on July the 11th and 12th. So it's only 10 days away, and Karina is going to be back being one of our guest speakers. So if you missed today, there is no reason to miss it because you can just play back.
Maybe
or
you want more.
You can come
We're going to go
join
deeper.
us. Yeah, come and join us at the Paranormal Conference, and the ticket link will go up for you there. But Karina is going to be one of our amazing guests again, and we're going to be diving even deeper. We're going to be asking the really juicy questions.
And you don't have to actually be there on the 11th and 12th. It is recorded. You can come back and watch it at any time.
Absolutely.
Fabulous.
Absolutely.
Can't wait for
Ron,
that.
Ron wants more, please.
Yeah, and the great thing about the conference too is that 50% of everything we raise goes to two non-profit organisations here in the Hunter Valley that look after gorgeous little animals. So
Right.
yeah, we want tickets sold, and look, we are just so thankful for you spending your evening with us, Karina, and we can't wait to have you back in 10 days' time at our wonderful conference.
Is it
So
only 10 days
My
away?
pleasure. Yeah, that's really soon.
it'll be
Thank
just more
you.
of the
Thank you
same.
so much.
Oh, look, thank you so very,
Yeah,
very
thank
much.
you.
People have loved this episode, and having you talk and your insight to everything that you have spent the last 10 years evolving. And all we can say is keep going and
Oh,
bring
thank
us
you.
more.
Thank
to
you,
all-
Anne. Thank you, Renata. It's been so great to be here.
Thank you so much. Now, I'm going to pop you out of the screen, but just hang
Yep.
in there. And for all of our beautiful fans who have been on there wanting their tarot card readings, come back at 8:30.
Yeah.
Notice how quiet I was? I was being a very good girl.
Yeah.
I
So-
didn't bring out the chook
No.
because there's been complaints about the chook.
So yes, we will be back at 8:30 on the Frightfully Good channel to do some live tarot readings. But isn't Karina fabulous?
Yeah, that was
Her
fantastic.
stories are amazing. So again, please come through to our paranormal conference in 10 days' time, and tickets are still on sale. We want you there because not only will Karina be back, but we have 11 other guest speakers that are going to be on. So all with fascinating topics. So
All right.
thank you all.
So thank you all. And for those who'll be back on for the tarot, we'll see you in half an hour. Bye.